Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Rick Import for Orchard Software, and our session today is laboratory data is essential for your value-based contracts, the how and why, or the why and how. And our presenter today is Matt Modleski, Executive Vice President for Business Development with Orchard Software. And our session is sponsored by our good friends at Orchard Software. And if you've never heard Matt present before, you're in for a real treat. I can tell you that right now. Matt Modleski, as Executive Vice President of Corporate and Business Development at Orchard Software, Matt is responsible for strengthening Orchard's corporate relationships and bringing additional value through new business opportunities. Previously, Matt led the operation of more than 70 physician practices and was a key member of the executive team at American Health Network. From 2006 to 2014, he was a partner at Stovall Granger Modleski, a healthcare consulting firm with expertise in the healthcare environment and competitive positioning. Prior to his work in healthcare sales and marketing, Matt was an accomplished pilot in the U.S. Air Force. He was awarded the 355th Wing Instructor Pilot of the Year and was also a solo pilot on the United States Air Force demonstration team, the Thunderbirds. And as I mentioned to you before, it is a delight to bring to our podium Matt Modleski. Matt, welcome to you, my friend.
Rick, thanks so very much. And all that pressure with the intro, I'm trembling over here just a little bit. No, honestly. I do want to say thanks to Rick, Susanna, Peter at Whitehat. They do a great job helping us bring this value to the audience here. And I'd also be remiss for not thanking Kim Futrell, who's in our marketing department, a lab specialist with a long legacy of lab expertise. She writes our white papers. She keeps me on track. She builds these beautiful slides. So without Kim, none of this would be possible. So thanks, Kim, for all your efforts in putting this together with me. So we did a presentation like this, a webinar similar to this last year, and it was fairly well received. And so after we got that feedback back, we talked a little bit more about what we could do to enhance the value of this, because I think it's really important for you in the lab or lab administration to understand how valuable the data that you produce is, not just from a lab results perspective, but for the value-based contracts that the lab data is impacting. And last time, I think we stopped one level short of maybe where we should have. Hey, Rick, I just saw a chat that asked about whether anything was being shared. Are people seeing the slides? Just want to make sure that's up.
So we're seeing the first slide.
Yeah, that's okay. That's where I'm supposed to be. Yep. Okay. Now I have to regroup because I was panicked that somebody wasn't seeing it. No, here we go. So last time we stopped at where the lab data impacted contracts at the provider level, and that was good because we're going to talk more about that today. It's the place that really the information does have immediate impact. But I want to take one step further back today and maybe focus on where those metrics and that information comes from as it relates to the payers, because the payers are the ones that drive the elements of value-based contracting into the contracts that the organization of providers sign up to. And so that's kind of the focus today. It's a little bit heavier lift than last time, but I promise, even though we'll go a little deeper, we'll come back to the so what. So what's in it for me? What do I need to do? What sort of reports would help bring value to my organization? And we'll certainly answer any questions after that if we haven't answered them in the presentation. So let's get going. What are the learning objectives today? We want to illustrate healthcare's payment model progression from straight fee-for-service to fully delegated risk as it relates to value-based contracts. We want to outline the role laboratory data has in successful payer contract performance and for proper documentation of patient health status and risk. And that's really important. This is one of the elements where lab data cements what's been diagnosed and gives proper support to the reimbursement associated with that. explain how lab data applies to quality performance metrics, and appraise the value that point-of-care testing and lab metrics bring to value-based contracts, including specific data mining examples. We'll show you some reports. And the reason we talk, point-of-care testing specifically is many of you are seeing more and more testing move to point-of-care. And so bringing the value of that data to the folks who are looking at your contract performance is really, really important. So we want to try to view this through the payer's lens, right? And then show the types of ways that this information can be useful to both you, the people that use your lab, and then to the payers who sign up those contracts with your organization. So let's start with a little bit of a review on what value-based contracts are, sort of where are we and how did we get here. You look way down at the left side of this slide, straight fee-for-service medicine is the transactional model. We'll describe that in the next slide or give you the definition, but it's the old days, right? And we still have a lot of fee-for-service out there, but we're moving down this arrow towards different types of payment models, and obviously have been on that journey for a while. So accountable care organizations were really a Medicare contract with shared savings. That was the initiation of something significant as it relates to value-based contracts. From that, there have been all sorts of hybrid contracts, and that's really, the blue VBCs. They can be a zillion different things, and they are quite different based on the payer, but they do have some very common themes, and that's really where we want to focus our energy. We don't want to focus on the differences, but we'll focus on the things that are in almost every one of those contracts and some of the elements that every payer is interested in. And then fully delegated risk in the Medicare Advantage world is really where the medical group, in most cases, is delegated the risk and most of the premium dollar and actually pays claims. Now, that's a very complex contract to get into, but for the people who do it well, and there are some out there in the country, it's very rewarding for both providers, the patients, and the payers do well in that mix as well. So we won't talk a ton about fully delegated risk, but we are going to talk a lot about Medicare Advantage because it's the fastest growing insurance product in the country, and almost all of you will have some level of connectivity to Medicare Advantage contracts in the organizations that your lab serves. So let's look at a couple of definitions real quick. Fee for service. Okay, so best described as transactional payment. You do a lab test, the test gets paid for. You do 5 lab tests, the 5 tests get paid for. I like to say, can anyone see a problem with this model? Let's say I was to pay you for every email that you sent. Would you send more or less emails? Okay, if anybody said less, look in the mirror, see if you're being honest. Okay, I'll put a filter on it, a quality filter. They have to be an email that has something to do with work. Okay, would you send more or less emails? All right, so you would send more. Let's say then I cut the reimbursement per email from $1 to 75 cents, but I left the same system in place. That would be discounted fee for service. Would you send more or less emails? You can see how fast the fee for service model created problems for us in terms of utilization. And that's really what these other models that we're in the middle of now are trying to undo, is all those habits that we created with more equals more. More transactions equals more revenue. You all have a Dr. Smith that orders too many tests. I know them, they're out there. The reality is we're doing a lot of good work to bring those some light to that, and the value-based contracts that we're signing demand that we manage cost, and so we're doing a much better job in utilization management maybe than we used to. So shared savings, upside risk is really what I want to talk about, the upside and downside risk in these shared savings arrangements. Most contracts have some level of shared savings or bonus payments. If all of these shared savings arrangements have 2 components. One is a cost component. You must come in below a certain threshold of cost. and the other is a quality component where the quality measurements have to meet a certain threshold for you to get paid, the bonus, okay? Because these are typically bonus payments in addition to a fee-for-service type of transaction. The upside risk component means you're not going to pay any money back if you don't hit both your cost and quality metrics, okay? So upside risk contracts are only positive bonus payments. Downside risk contracts are where your organization has said, our systems are good, we feel very good about our ability to manage cost and control quality. We're willing to take a bigger bonus payment if we hit these metrics and also take on some risk to pay money back if we don't. Okay, so when you talk to contracting people and you're having discussions about what sorts of contracts you've signed with the payers, ask questions about upside and downside risk. A, you'll look really smart. No, I'm just saying it's good to understand how much energy your organization is and the organizations your lab serves are putting into hitting these numbers. If you've got downside risk, they're putting a ton of energy in because nobody wants to pay money back, right? All right, moving right along. Before we get into sort of a more payer-oriented discussion, we wanted to review how the money flows as it relates to Medicare, straight Medicare versus Medicare Advantage. So when you get to Medicare Advantage, there's a big difference in the way the government money flows. From a Medicare perspective, it's a straight fee schedule. Providers get paid based on what that fee schedule says for whatever they're doing. Medicare Advantage puts commercial payers in between the government and the providers. And the commercial payers are the ones that are trying to drive success in the things they're being measured on by the government, right? This becomes what I would call the operational arm or a partner in the operational arm working with providers to improve quality and lower costs. So when you look at CMS setting a bunch of rules out there or things they're going to measure the plans on, it's easy to see why the plans would then pass those same things down to the provider groups they're contracting with. And that's really the essence of what we're talking about today when you think about value-based contracts, how they're built, how they get measured, and why you can bring so much value to that world with your lab information. So, moving right along, how do we get successful alignment with payers? You know, the relationship for 50 or 60 years in U.S. healthcare between providers and payers has been, let's say, stressful. Okay, so it's stressful for a variety of reasons, but I believe value-based contracts give us an opportunity, if we understand each other, to be much more on the same page with the patient actually benefiting from that alignment. And that's really the essence of today. So if we want to bring value, let's start with understanding what they're trying to do, meaning the payer, and what they're being held accountable for, and how those things in their world work their way into the contracts that our organization signs up to, or could be a variety of organizations that our lab serves, so depending on what lab type you're in. So let's think about this through sort of some broad lenses, tips for first aligning value with the payers. Maximize your service to the things that are important to the payer. You're not likely to go in and win a fee-for-service discussion to get a higher reimbursement on a CBC, right? Those days have kind of gone by the wayside. So what can we do to show how the lab, our lab, will provide value-based services that link to some of these higher-level measurements for the plan? And then let's be reasonable, understand those pain points and what the plan's trying to achieve, and then present a fair offer that helps both parties succeed, right? So if we can bring that value, this type of data, in support of what both our users want to accomplish and the payers who the users have signed those contracts with, won't we all look good, right? That's where we have a win-win-win. And you hear that in business, and it's hard to get a triple win. But I believe there's an opportunity for us to do that. And because you're laboratorians, using data to show value is something that, like, you guys eat, breathe, sleep. The beauty of laboratorians is you don't make a lot of crazy emotional decisions without looking at data. And so if you really get into the world of what am I good at in the lab business, well, I'm good at producing data. The question is, do I know what that data means to a broader audience, and how do I figure that out? And here's some things to think about. All of these value-based contracts, and I'm saying all, I'm sure you'll find one that doesn't have it. Don't go out on the web and look right now, because I'm watching. I know what you're doing. No, I don't. I have no idea. I don't want to freak you out. But I want to say 99.9% of value-based contracts signed with medical groups are actively monitoring diabetic patients with and/or chronic kidney disease. And there's reasons for that, right? They're very expensive chronic conditions to maintain, and they're also very high reimbursement if you take care of these patients well in this new world and document the information well. So data as it relates to these two conditions is really, we're going to focus a lot of energy today into these two chronic conditions. But for the patients, it helps us prioritize the patients we need to see, or your providers need to see, by disease severity. We can start thinking about labs before and after the visit that get ready to make therapy decisions, and then also help monitor afterwards. We can then work with providers to document the proper codes that they're using to capture value for these patients. And then obviously, and one of the most important things we'll show with our reporting examples today, communicate to providers the patients that need to be seen. This is really, really important as it relates to value-based contracts. I'll say this again later, but I'll say it now. A lot of these metrics in value-based contracts, the only one that matters is the last measurement of the year. Let me say that again. The only measure that matters in the contract, in the performance of that contract, is the last measurement of the year. So you could have a diabetic patient that gets an A1C that's great in the first quarter, great in the second quarter, great in the third quarter, and in the fourth quarter, one that's outside the range of having that patient in control, and you won't get credit for that patient for that year. So it's good to know that the last test of the year, the last supporting documentation, is the one that counts, and we'll come back to that later. So the benefits of thinking this way, oh, wait a second here, what did I do? Oh, I hit the big arrow instead of the next arrow. I got to go back. Everybody calm down. Okay, I'm back. The benefits of this are threefold. Patients get to better manage their disease. They do avoid dangerous complications if we're on top of this and we're managing chronic conditions with good documentation and data. And obviously, they stay out of the hospital. That's good for everybody. It's good for providers. It's good for the payers. It's good for these value-based contracts. On the payer side, or if it's an ACO on the Medicare Shared Savings side, we avoid the negative financial effects of missing diagnosis codes. We also can realistically estimate costs and achieve higher shared savings. In other words, if I'm in a shared savings contract that's based on me doing a good job and actually controlling costs and improving quality, then I can achieve a higher number by doing that well. Providers improving their quality scores, they are also going to benefit in the bonus payments, and not the least important to the provider group, their patients get better. So again, another win-win-win opportunity for us. All right. I need you to take a little bit of a deep breath as we get ready to jump into this next bit of math. We're going to measure or talk about how payers get measured. I want you to think of this as a scuba mission. How many of you are scuba divers? If there's any scuba divers, this is a 2-tank dive. We're putting on the first tank right now. I promise we'll come up for air, we shall regroup. We will summarize the key elements of this deep dive so that you don't walk away thinking, I learned a lot, but I can't remember any of it, and I don't know what to do now. Like, that would be a horrible waste of the hour. So I promise you, even though we're going to get very deep here, we are going to bring this back to what can I do with my data that's meaningful to these contracts and then ultimately to the payer who is signing them with us. So let's jump right into how the payers get measured. They get measured by a set of data called HEDIS, Healthcare Effectiveness Data and Information Set. HEDIS is a comprehensive set of standardized performance measures designed to provide purchasers and consumers with the information they need for reliable comparisons of health plan performance. Folks, this is how health plans get graded, with this data set. It's also important at the bottom of this slide that you see most of these measurements, or many of them, also are used in the Medicare STAR rating system, which is a 1 to 5 score. There is tremendous amounts of bonus money attached to improving STAR ratings. Tens of or hundreds of millions of dollars for health plans that can drive an improvement in STAR ratings. So it's not a small thing, it's a giant thing. So let's start with understanding HEDIS is the sort of the baseline for where plan measurement comes from, and then look at this. There are more than 90 measures in these 6 domains of care in the HEDIS measures. So I'm a health plan, and these 6 domains are the things I'm being measured on. And within each of those, there's a whole bunch of subsets of measurements, and many of them can be measured with lab data. It's beautiful, right? It's a beautiful thing. Puff up your chest a little bit if you're a laboratorian. So knowing this, right, if I'm a health plan and I'm going to be held accountable for improving things in these 6 buckets, when I build a contract with a provider group, I take the things they can control and improve, and I put them in their contract, right? That's how this works. That's how it works. So we go across and we say, I already told you, we talked about this earlier, diabetes is going to be in almost every value-based contract, and it's there for a variety of reasons, which we talked about. But here's comprehensive diabetes care, the HEDIS example, and the documentation needed to show you're doing a good job. I have to have an A1C. I have to have blood pressure under control. I have to do kidney tests, nephropathy work. I have to do a retinal eye exam. What is usually missing from successfully completing this? Oh, look, there's a big red arrow on this page. Ding, ding, ding. Incomplete information related to yearly lab testing and results. So if you are not doing this in an integrated way with your organization, the people who chase this down are usually over in your pop health team, right? You've got nurses who are digging through charts, trying to find a lab result, trying to find some information to support documentation of these things up at the top. And we also have just incomplete information in general in the chart. So here's that asterisk I talked about earlier, and I said I'd say again. The date and result of the last screening or test in the measurement year is the one that counts for the payer. I hope somebody's writing that down. Dear God, tell me somebody is taking a note. Because when we get all done here today and you think, how would I help my organization make sure that A, I know what we're being measured on, and B, that we're doing a good job at tracking those measurements to see if I might need to, say, help get a patient in because they're just barely outside, where we would get credit. That type of thinking for you in the lab will go a long way to helping your organization succeed and helping the payer be happy with your user organizations as well. All right. So if I'm a fisherman, and my brother says when I go fishing, he says, by the way, I'm not going to tell you what I fish for till afterwards. Ask me in a question, because if I tell you now, you guys will all be off Googling that type of fish. But when I go fishing, my brother says, listen, no picture, no fish. In other words, don't tell me about the one that got off at the boat. This is the same way. You don't have a lab result in the chart Don't tell me about how well you took care of the patient. I don't care if I'm the payer. You got to prove it, and you prove it with lab information in a lot of cases. So no picture, no fish, no lab result, no credit. That's how I want you to think as we move forward. All right, so here's breaking this down a little bit further, this comprehensive diabetes care. Here are all the things that we might need to measure to get credit. Depends on what our particular contract says. But think about if you had your data organized in a way that you could start to present reports like this to population health or to your CMO. Hey, here are all our diabetic patients with an A1C over 9. Well, if I get credit for, in my value-based contract, or the payer wants me to get these folks below 9, I can see at least 3 or 4 patients in this group that I definitely want to get in again, okay? Doesn't say we're not going to try to get them all in, but if we have limited resources, I can see several that I would want to get in off of this report. And I'm not sure that many of you are thinking about these types of reports and the people who need them to help your contract performance. But this is what the payers put in. These are the types of reports that can help us be successful, help our customers be successful, and ultimately help the payers be successful. Here's another report for A1Cs less than 8. Okay, now if I've got knowing what, no, here's a test. You know what you know that the last measurement of the year counts, and I've seen some of these patients multiple times this year. If I've got somebody at a 7.8 and I get credit for below an 8, I might not want to bring that person until January for their next A1C if I'm understanding value-based contracting appropriately. So I'm not saying we don't do good clinical care. I'm saying the way we choose to bring patients in for visits can be directly linked sometimes to whether that last measurement's going to help us or hurt us. And in the case of, we had one customer who by 6 patients, they just had 6 patients who missed one of these metrics in a given contracting year. It cost their organization more than $400,000. So these aren't little misses, right? They seem little, but they can be pretty big. Here's another example of a report, right? Just breaking it down differently. A1Cs below 7. How important would that be? What would we do? Who would want to see these types of reports? Your chief medical officer, your VP of quality, your CFO, maybe, and maybe whoever's managing the performance of your value-based contracts. Probably some combination of those three folks. So I know you're thinking right now, you're probably thinking, are there other HEDIS measures other than, say, A1C that the lab could be involved in? Sure, here's another example of a screening metric. So colorectal cancer screening, members age 50 to 75, did they have a fecal occult blood test done? It can't be, in this case, can't be a point of care in-office test. But look at the common chart deficiencies, not consistently documented in health histories. Typically, this information is included on health history forms. However, this information is not always provided as part of the record submissions. So there are a ton of screening metrics that are in these value-based contracts. Most cancer screenings are in them, if it's certainly a primary care type of a contract. So there are all sorts of things that the lab can touch or can get involved in that are meaningful. These are just several examples using diabetes in this one screening example. There's what it would look like if you're pulling a report on it. All right. Now, I said we were going to take a deep dive. This is the second tank. Put on your second tank. We're going deeper. Calculating risk scores as it relates to Medicare Advantage is challenging, right? We did some of this in the last session, but it's worth doing again because you have to see how valuable your data is to the users of your lab and to the payers who they sign contracts with. So there are about 70,000 ICD-10 codes. About 9,500 of those codes map to 79 HCC or hierarchical chronic condition categories. All of that links to this, risk adjustment factor scores. I'm going to say this, somebody might yell at me, not too many people who are in Medicare Advantage contracting would yell at me, but somebody might. If you are in the Medicare Advantage business, you have 10 things that are really important to do. And the first 9 of them are understanding risk adjustment. This is really, really, really important to the payers and to your provider groups who use your labs. So let's walk through this math. An average Medicare patient risk adjustment factor is 1.0. The starting RAF score is determined by demographics, age, race, etc., and a market-based adjustment. We're just using 1.0 as an example because math in public is really bad for me, which as a pilot, you guys are probably thinking, dude, you should be able to do good math in public, but sometimes I slip up. CMS reimburses 1% higher for every 0.01 risk adjustment factor increase. So what's that mean? $100 per member per month for every 0.1 RAF increase. All right, so let's look at that rolled up. If I've got a 1.0 as my RAF on a patient, I'm getting paid for that patient $1,000 per month, per member per month. That's PMPM. So I'm looking at one patient in this market at $1,000 per member per month. I increase the RAF by 0.1. That goes to $1,100 a month or $13,200 annually. Okay, that's the math and risk adjustment. Now, what really drives risk adjustment? The diagnosis code, the way those codes map, drives the RAF score. The RAF score drives the reimbursement. Proper documentation retains the reimbursement. Let me say that again. RAF score drives the reimbursement. Appropriate, proper documentation with supporting data retains the reimbursement. So you can see how important data that supports HCC documentation is. So what is HCC documentation? You look at those 79 HCC categories, and these are 3 points that valid HCC documentation requires. Prior to the pandemic, it had to be a face-to-face visit with a nurse practitioner, PA, or higher. Now, the pandemic has created some changes here. I don't know if they're here to stay, but they have allowed some of those visits to be done virtually. Documentation also requires status or condition. So we've got a diagnosis, we've got a status or condition, and we've got a plan of action, the third element. To the right there, you see words that basically sort of outline what that means. Status or condition, do we have labs? Did we order labs? Labs are really important here. You're going to see as we move to the next slide, even more important. Well, I got to click the button. The importance of meet, monitor, evaluation, assess or address, and treat. Now let's look at this. Let's look at this together. Signs, symptoms, disease progression, disease regression. If documentation for every diagnosis has to have that, how do we know whether a disease is progressing or regressing? Oh, it's you in the lab sending a result. How do we evaluate someone? Oh, look, test results, response to treatment. Those would be more test results. How do we assess or address? Oh, we order tests. How are we going to treat? Well, we're probably going to look at a lab to make a medication or therapy choice. So folks, your stamp, your data is all over helping make sure that the documentation is right and you've got supporting information behind it. The payers are being evaluated on this, and they don't get paid by the government in that Medicare Advantage world unless this is all accurate. So they then beat up the providers to get the accurate documentation done, and then you're trying to help the providers not get beat up and make the payers happy with your lab. All right, so documentation is critical for Medicare Advantage. Every patient with diabetes should be evaluated for many of the manifestations and comorbidities of the disease. So look at this. Diabetes without complications. In the old fee-for-service world, what we tried to do is code as fast as we could, right? We wanted to do things fast because we were sending emails. The more emails you sent, the more you got paid. So we don't worry about how accurate things were. Diabetes without complications, that's fine. Just put it down there, E11.9. Get me a 0.104 HCC weight. How about diabetes with CKD down at the bottom here, or any of these other conditions? Oh, look, that's a 0.318. Well, in the old world, nobody would have cared. In the new world, everyone cares. And let me show you some additional math here when we really get into chronic kidney disease, which, again, is in almost every one of your value-based contracts because it's very expensive to not manage well. So, no picture, no fish. No picture, no fish. No documentation, no dollars. If I don't get the right documentation to support my diagnosis, I don't have a GFR from the lab that says it's below 30, then I don't get credit for that HCC weight, right? I don't get the 0.237 added to that patient's per member per month. This gets really, really expensive, and we still have to take care of these patients. So now we're taking care of them, and we don't have the resources to do it well. So let me show you what this math looks like as we roll it out a little bit. All right, financial impact of poor documentation. I take a diabetes without complications from the previous slide, HCC 19. It RAFs at 0.121. That gets me 121 extra per member per month, times 12 months is $1,452 per patient, times 500 members in my plan or in my med group. It's $726,000 a year. I went really fast. I didn't do a lot of good documentation. I didn't have lab results that support it, and I got paid an additional $726 in my value-based world. But wait a second. What if I did it with proper documentation? I did slow down. I did talk to the lab. We made sure that we looked at everybody with diabetes and made sure they had some kind of a kidney test. From that, for the ones that showed some wobbliness, we actually did a GFR to make sure that we have appropriate documentation for those that might have stage 4 or 5 kidney disease. In this case, it's vascular disease as a complication with diabetes. Let's look at this math. Diabetes with complications, first of all, I've slowed down and I've got the right HCC code. That RAFs at 0.374. Vascular disease RAFs at 0.319. I add that together, it adds $693 per member per month to my reimbursement or to the plan that's now in the contract with me. Times 12 months, I've added $8,000 to take care of that patient. Times 500 members is $4 million. So you go back to the previous slide, you go, 726 sounded pretty good till I saw that. Now I'm feeling really bad. And the reality is we lost $3,400,000 of money to take care of patients with that flows through the plan to the provider group. So this is hugely important to Medicare Advantage, and the lab plays such a critical role in getting credit and keeping credit for taking care of these patients the appropriate way. So now you're all jazzed up, right? Like I just showed you 3.4 million reasons to get really excited about your lab data. So I know you probably got a little tingle going on right now. So how do you get an A+ with the payer? Like, how do we help the plan get an A+? Because if they're doing well with their contracts, or their in the case it's not the government, they're just doing well with their employers who are buying up a private plan, they're feeling really good. If we're talking about Medicare Advantage in particular, and I told you we would stay on that because it's the fastest growing insurance in the country, how do we help them get a 5-star rating? What the heck is a star anyway? Well, a star is the way that these plans get evaluated by the government. And then they take that star rating and they put it out there, and there are benefits that come with increased star ratings. One of them is increased revenue, but another one is ability to market year-round. They can do different things if they have a 5-star rating, a plan, a health plan. So they get graded in these 5 categories: staying healthy, screenings, tests, and vaccines. There's that test word again. Managing chronic conditions, which we just talked about. Being responsive, plan responsiveness and care. Managing complaints, getting services. How do you take care of your customers? Some of those things we don't have much to do with, but many of these things we're directly linked to as a lab. So let me show you what those measurements actually look like inside the HEDIS STAR performance metrics. There's the HEDIS word again. Most of these measurements are pulled over, or these categories are pulled over from HEDIS into the STAR performance metrics that are the plans also being graded on the 5-star scale. One thing I want you to notice is the weighting, the weight over there in the second last column. What that means is each of these criteria has a different overall value, or at least some of them are different, either 1s or 3s on this slide. But if I've got a 3 element, in other words, diabetes, blood sugar, that's something that I know the plan is going to be interested in, because it's worth 3 times as much if they can move that number in the right direction. So when you see things like STAR performance metrics and their weights, you can expect that the higher weighted elements would be ones that would show up in your provider-based contracts. I hope that makes sense. Med adherence, controlling blood pressure, all of these things that providers have a direct ability to impact and therefore show up in the contract. If the lab can help on these in any way, shape, or form, then you're going to be improving your value to the organization overall. So looking at what this might look like if you were looking at a report. So blood sugar is controlled. That's the rating measure. Well, what's that mean? Well, the description on this particular element is less than 9, right? So percent of plan members with a diabetes who had A1C tests during that year that showed their average blood sugars under 9. Okay, this is a test. In that year, but which measurement's the one that counts? The last one. All right, diabetes care, kidney disease monitoring. Percent of plan members with diabetes who had a kidney function test. Doesn't say which one, so we're going to show you a few different examples. All right, so if I'm getting ready to pull reports here, I want to go, okay, what's in the contract that we've signed? What are the things that the plan's trying to achieve? And then I'm going to set up a report that pulls these things. A1Cs over 9, GFR less than 30, CMS star rating, yes, kidney disease, we're going to measure that, MA plan members with diabetes. So these are kind of the filters that go in to set up a report like this one. Okay, this is a plan with my diabetic patients with an A1C less than 9. I hope I'm getting credit for all those patients. You want to talk to Pop Health, you want to talk to your VP of Quality, you want to talk to your CMO, see how these types of reports and this type of data can help them ensure you're getting credit and the plan's getting credit for you guys doing good work. People will love you for this, man. They will absolutely love you if you can start moving some of these numbers in the right direction. Okay, so percent of plan members with diabetes who had a kidney function test. In this case, it's people with diabetes and a GFR less than 30. I already showed you what that diagnosis with proper documentation and test results is worth, right? We get paid to take care of this patient and share in the reimbursement for doing it well if we're in a contract on Medicare Advantage. But this is a report that's set up to show diabetic patients with a GFR less than 30. Do all these people have a diagnosis of chronic kidney disease stage 4? They should. That should be in the chart, and here's your supporting documentation. You guys you're gonna kill it after this. You're gonna make big friends around your organization. Well, I hope you are. That's why we're doing it. Here's a different type of kidney function test, right? Because there are screenings and there are actual numbers that support certain diagnoses. Depending on what's in your contract, may depend on what type of report you want to provide to the organization. This is simply diabetes with elevated microalbumin or a creatinine ratio. I've got another example. Elevated blood creatinine ratio. These are all tests that fit the, have you done kidney screening? The GFR would show support for a diagnosis of stage 4, stage 5 kidney disease. So I hope as you think about this and you think about having your data organized in a way that you can present meaningful stuff to your organization, think about presenting a slide like this to your CMO or your VP of contracting or your Pop Health VP. Hey, I looked in our system and here's our total number of diabetic patients, and we've got 441 of them with no kidney screening. Wait a second. If I'm the CMO, I've done my math, I know that about 14% of my diabetic patients have chronic kidney disease. So I look at that slide and I think 14% of 441 is misdiagnoses. Now all of a sudden, whoever sent me this slide and can back it up with data looks like a genius, helping me and our organization perform better. Now here are patients with kidney screening, GFR less than 30, 176. I hope we've got documentation in the charts that gets us credit for those patients. And then I've got GFR greater than 30, knowing what you know about the last measurement of the year. If you had a 30 or a 31, would you bring them back in for another GFR? I might. It might make good sense from a variety of perspectives. All right, so this is the type of report that really will get people's attention. This is the how, these reports are what we wanted to show you this time, and how to position your lab for success in this world, right? How to position your lab for success in this world. All right, you get to take your regulator off, you're up for air, you take the mask off after the deep dive, feeling pretty good, and here's what you need to take away. First of all, knowledge is power, right? Knowledge is power. Knowing what your payers are trying to achieve and how that impacts your lab customers is step one. Next step is to meet with the people in your organization or your user organization who know how those payer elements are cascaded into the value-based contracts that they've signed. This will help you in the lab focus on meaningful lab data that helps show or affect the value of those contracts. So that's step two. Step three, if you've got a system that you can pull reports from, like the examples we've shown, is set up time with your CMO, the VP of quality, or whomever measures contract performance. It could be somebody in your contract office. And share the types of data you have or could get that helps to move that needle, okay? So that's step three. Step four is just a pat on the back. You don't have to be an expert in this stuff to bring value. Be proud of your lab data. It's really, really valuable. You can help bridge a value prop between lab, users of the lab, and the payer who helps set up those contracts with the users of the lab simply by doing these four things in a meaningful, thoughtful way. And so I think that's about, let me see, I don't think I have any. Wait, I got one more slide. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's it. That's all I have. I think we're going to be ready for questions at this point, Rick, if it works for you.
We are. Thank you very much, Matt. Always a delight to listen to you. I've had some folks say the same thing, so that's always a good sign. And let's go ahead and move to our questions. Here we go. And our first question, Matt, is how do I even know if we have a value-based contract in our organization?
So you ask. The beauty of that is you don't have to know the answer before you ask the question. So the three people who would know for sure would be your chief medical officer, because he or she is working with the docs to help them move the needle on these metrics. So your CMO would know. If you don't feel comfortable talking to the CMO or don't want to, just because you and he or she don't do lunch and you're not really great friends, go to the VP of quality or your director of quality or your director of population health. Those folks are usually the ones who are doing all the chasing and mining of data to get credit for the contracts when you've got holes. So that would be a second person. Then I think my last resort, because I think those first two are your best choices, I would just simply talk to the contracting office for your organization and help them, ask them to help steer you in the proper direction. That would be my suggestion.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Sorry, it takes an extra couple of seconds here to unmute myself. Who should I talk to about getting more involved in helping with value-based contracting?
So same people I just mentioned, and there's a meeting that typically takes place in your organization, more than likely on a quarterly basis, where the payers will come in and they'll essentially have a round table on the performance of how your group or your providers are doing in these elements that are baked into your contracts. Ask to be invited to that meeting. Don't need to say anything. You can just go and listen. Look at what they present, how they present it, the things they're very focused on and trying to improve. And from that meeting, if you can get a seat at the table to witness one, you'll come away with a lot of ideas on how to help your organization improve. So the same three people I mentioned in the first answer, CMO, VP of Quality, or Director of Pop Health and or Contracting, I would put the CFO in this second bucket because he or she will definitely be invited to those payer meetings that happen on a quarterly basis. See if you can get an invite there and go in with the idea that you simply want to learn the things that the payer is talking about that are most important to the contracts that your organization is part of.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
This is great info, and I like the examples that you used. Thank you for sharing that, Vincent. Appreciate it. If we wanted to dig further into more metrics from HEDIS, where do we go to learn more?
Google's a wonderful thing in this case. Like the HEDIS measures are fully published. So I don't have a link, but you don't need it from me. If you just go out and spend a little bit of time on the web and say, you know, what are the 90 HEDIS measures, or what are the 90, what are the HEDIS measures being used in grading health plans, you'll find more information in that domain, and it'll be pretty obvious whether it's good or it's not. But there should be the 6 domains, and then in the neighborhood of 90 that could have changed. It could be, could be 100, but you'll find them. They're published, and you'll also, if you go to the government website for ACOs, can find the ACO metrics published the same way. And there's a lot of crossover between those, as you may well imagine. And you will always find diabetes and chronic kidney disease as elements being measured across the spectrum there. So that's why we focus so much on those. We just knew they'd be in each of the contracts that your organizations would be signing up to.
Excellent, thank you. And for this, our last question for right now, similar to the other one about HEDIS, but are there more examples of HEDIS STAR scores that involve lab-related data?
There are. If you think of any screening test, so anything that you do for cancer screening is going to be part of HEDIS and or STAR measures. What happens with both of these, and the reason I showed the slide that I showed with the government working through the payer down to the provider level, is what happens with the payer in the middle is the government's measuring the plan on all of those elements. The ones that you'll find on the web, they're all published. What happens is the payer looks at the patient mix that your providers are seeing. And if they're seeing all geriatric patients, then they're looking at a set of measurements and things that you need to be concerned about as a provider group that's in that patient subset. And so that's what gets baked into your contracts. If they're looking at, pediatricians, that's going to be something different. First of all, Medicare is not going to be involved, but you could still have a commercial plan that's incenting behavior, but they're going to incent those pediatrician docs on certain tests or screens for their patients that are very different than you know, you're an older population. So as it relates specifically to Medicare Advantage and STAR ratings, they'll pull the ones from the total gamut that they're being held to account for, the plan, and they'll look at the ones they think your provider groups can impact the most, and those are the ones that they're going to try to negotiate into a contract with your provider group. Again, sitting at that meeting that I mentioned is the best way to see what they've taken out of the broad scope of measurements and put into your local contract. Ask to be invited to that contract review meeting, and when they say, why does a lab person want to come to a contract review meeting, tell them that you're so dang smart that you know how these contracts work, and you want to make sure all the data you're sitting on is getting to the right place in support of RAF scores. Somebody will probably pass out. You'll have to give them mouth-to-mouth to wake them up, but they'll be so proud of you because you're helping the organization succeed in a way that they never thought you could, simply because we don't go do that enough as lab people. We don't force ourselves into the place where this stuff's being looked at and we can bring a ton of value. So that's the place to really see those quarterly meetings, that they're simply business reviews with your payers. You'll see everything in your contracts or that your user med groups are seeing. You'll see all that stuff in a granular way, and you can be very focused on the things that are important.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
I have to say the type of fish I fished for was a muskellunge, a muskie. They're really big freshwater fish. We put them all back, but I know you'll go Google the type of fish. Now that it's 2 o'clock, I probably could let you do that without getting you in trouble. But take a look, that they're a mighty beautiful animal. Sorry, I had to say, Rick, I told you I'd say what kind of fish we fish for.
Yeah, you did. That's part of the deal. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'm glad you put them back. I was kind of thinking here.
Oh, yeah, they all go back. They all go
they're
back.
Good for frying or baking. Yeah.
Yeah, they're beautiful animals.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I will have to actually.
Yes, you have to go Google it.
I will. And thanks, Matt. Always a delight listening to you. And it makes me laugh. And I do appreciate the time here today.
Oh, thanks so much. Enjoyed it, Rick. Always do. Thanks for having us.
Oh, you bet. And a big thanks to all of our friends at Orchard Software. Great organization, great people. We thank you for sponsoring today's event. The biggest thanks go to all of you for joining us. We know that you are out there on the front lines every day throughout this pandemic, and hope that you stay safe and healthy and that we get through this all in one piece. We do enjoy these webinars, and even more so having you join us. So have a wonderful rest of your day. Join us again very soon for another Orchard Software sponsored webinar. Thanks everyone for joining us. Take good care. Stay well. Bye-bye all.